This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates in central Iowa companies.
Amplified.
Welcome to Iowa We Can Do Better. We're your hosts, Liz Fleming
and Sarah Bose.
And today we have a very special guest with us, Melissa Vine.
Melissa Vine is running for Congress in District 3 against Zach Nunn, which is super exciting if you listen to episode 2.
Which we clearly said
we do not condone violence.
But there is someone who we just mentioned that rhymes with Mac Fun who has a punchable face. Anyway, we have a couple of capital updates to get through and a couple of just general kind of, hey, here's what's going on in Iowa announcements to get through before we have our special conversation with Melissa Vine. But
and outside of Iowa, we would be remiss to not mention the TikTok ban, as the reason we are here is because of TikTok.
Every day I wake up and think about it. I'm not that stressed out about it, but it's just kind of looming.
I'm not stressed out about it because I think, the idea of saying that TikTok has one owner is just not true. They don't. They are owned by a number of people, both in the U.S. and outside of it. And so I think it'll be held up with legal things and all of that. But I think it's mostly concerning that, climate change is happening. They're like, ban the TikTokies.
So many other things that could take priority, to name a few, just clean water, air for everyone, food for everyone.
Food for everyone, yes.
Make sure everyone's has their basic needs covered. But yes, definitely ban TikTok.
Ban TikTok.
I just made a TikTok about the TikTok ban. Oh, what a world. And basically, if it does, the law passed, Biden signed it or whatever, but the earliest that we're going to see anything really happening with it is a year from now.
Right.
So ByteDance, who's the parent company of TikTok, has 9 months to find a U.S. seller or shut down.
Yes.
In the U.S. And I promise you they'd rather shut down in the U.S. than sell their technology to a U.S. company.
It does seem likely, yes.
People like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are like, we'll take it.
Also, who's the other one? It's one of Trump's main guys who's like, I'll buy it. I'll buy TikTok.
How about no?
Yeah, please no. So yeah, that we have to mention that because, we are here because of TikTok. So what else?
It's going to get held up in court.
It's going to get held up in court.
TikTok's going to fight really. So we don't really know what's going to happen, but just know it's not going to disappear off your phone or anything.
No. And it's not happening today by any means. So
more importantly, we have this entire election cycle to use TikTok for getting information out, letting people know election info,
yes.
letting them know how to organize. So if you're listening to this, give us a follow on Instagram.
Iowa We Can Do Better.
And we will continue to post information there. TikTok videos will be reposted on Instagram just in case by whatever chance it all does go away. It won't, but we have all of our information there. We are excited to keep bringing you different guests and new information. Our whole goal is to just make sure that we are equipping you with as much information as possible to make a really informed and intentional decision this November.
Yes.
That about sums it up, right?
Yeah, for TikTok stuff. What's next?
Oh, well, let me get back to my list. There are some capital updates. The second funnel's over.
Yep.
Here's what survived and what didn't. Okay. I'm going to name something crazy and you're going to, just kidding. We're just going to go through the list. What survived? Arming school staff.
Yay!
What in the actual hell on earth?
That one infuriates me so much because I think I've mentioned this on here before. I just think about my high school English teacher or my high school history teacher, and I think they would rather jump off a roof than touch a gun. It's just, it's absurd.
I mean, I think of, I have so many people in my family who have worked in the schools, and it's like they, on top of everything else, you're going to give them this insane, dangerous weapon in there. There's so many implications that apparently either have been thought of and aren't taken seriously or haven't been thought of. And beyond that, it just defies logic to add more guns to a situation and expect that there will be less harmful outcomes.
That one's a mess.
It just defies logic.
Yeah.
But there's also a bill that survived that made it against the law to create AI pornography.
Because they're really tackling the tough issues right now.
I would have, if you could offer $100 to anyone in the House or the Senate to describe AI, Do you think it could sorry. A lot of people could, but I'm thinking of the people who are actively
some of our elderly friends.
Some of the elderly friends, it's just like, okay, whatever.
I want our Windsor Heights Dairy Queen loving elderly friend to describe AI to me. That's what I want.
Can we go one episode I just drooled. Can we go one episode without bringing up the Windsor Heights Dairy Queen? No.
No.
It would take a lot, and it's not something I'm willing to do. Another thing that happened in Iowa is gender balance is repealed. So Governor Kim Reynolds said that it would allow for the best candidate for the job to be hired. So gender balance was a requirement to make sure that, hey,
we want
save some room for the women
ladies,
at the table. Which brings me to a whole other thing. There was an article that came out that was talking about how people get better healthcare outcomes when they're treated by female practitioners.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just true across the board.
Yeah.
And I feel like we need to stop pretending that's not true.
Yes.
If it were me, I would repeal the gender balance and just put all women in charge.
That's it. Fully agree. And I think we'll get into
Why
that more
not?
shortly.
Honestly, though, why not? They've never tried it. I don't think it could get much worse around here.
True.
Put all the women in charge. Okay, things that failed as far as bills in the legislative funnel. The basic income.
Yeah, we're not allowed to even test basic income anymore because, as Liz likes to say, fuck poor people.
I don't like to say it.
No.
I like
but
to
that is-
repeat it because it
yes.
just summarizes all of these bills in a quick little phrase.
Yeah.
Fuck poor people, the Iowa GOP says.
Yeah.
Senate File 2412, which protected pesticide manufacturers from repercussions as long as their packaging was properly labeled. So that died.
That died, which is great because that was with cancer rates rising in Iowa, likely because of pesticides. That was a really gross bill. So I'm happy that one did not get through.
Real gross. Low-hanging fruit, but a huge struggle
It's
to
something.
apparently get it done.
It's something.
Baby Olivia failed.
Yes. So that incorrect growth of a fetus video that they were forcing children to watch is no longer going to be happening, and that is excellent news.
The more facts we can keep in school instead of weird fetal folklore, the better, I think. And unborn personhood, that has failed.
Yep.
So that would be saying that a fetus has the same rights as a person under law. That failed. And I know that might sound kind of sensitive and whatever. Go and watch our last episode with Iowans for Health Liberty, or listen to it, and you will get some more insight from actual doctors who insist on being able to do their actual jobs.
Yep.
Helpful. That covers my updates. But we have a special guest.
We do.
Her name is Melissa Vine, and she is running for Congressional District 3. This includes the Des Moines Metro, so think around that area. If your current representative is someone named Zach Nunn, this could be your next representative if you play your cards right. Welcome, Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
We are super excited to have you too. I mean, I've gone to a couple of your events now. Obviously, I'm very excited about seeing a strong, empathetic woman run for anything at all. But knowing that you would be my representative is really exciting.
And on a national scale, which is
And on
awesome.
a national scale. If there's one thing I wish Iowa could do, it's show people at a national level that we do have like good, solid people here, and we want them to be making the decisions for us. Because currently we're represented by Marionette Miller-Meeks, Randy Feenstra, Zach Nunn, and Ashley Hinson. And not a single one of these people is cutting it for me, and it's not cutting it for a lot of people.
Yep.
They were part of the most unproductive Congress of all time. How eager are you to get in there and make change? You've got to just be chopping at the bit, like, let me do it.
Yes, very eager, very eager. When I was called and asked about running and thinking about in this post-Dobbs hellscape that we're in, and this, patchwork of abortion rights across our country, and seeing abortion rights not necessarily just being the end goal for Republicans, but knowing that that's just the first domino. We're already starting to see what those next dominoes are going to be. And I was like, well, this timing is not perfect, but there's no perfect time to run for office. And so here we are, and I'm ready to get in and codify Roe on day one.
Yes.
Amazing.
Love that.
Amazing.
So one of the things that you talk about all the time is you are the mom of 4 boys. And we touched on a little bit yesterday that your parenting style has changed as your politics have changed. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, my story is that I grew up in a very conservative Republican home, and I believed that if you followed Republican values, if you played by the rules, everything would be fine for you. And I thought that everyone had equal access to their capacity to follow those rules, to stay on that line, so to speak. And so, but when I got out of domestic violence 10 years ago, overnight I went from being a wealthy small business owner to having $0 to my name. And I had these 4 little boys, 9 and under. All of a sudden, I was not welcome in those spaces anymore because I was not walking on that line. My family didn't look the way it was supposed to look. And my bank account didn't look the way it was supposed to look. And I realized for the first time in my life, these rules don't work for everyone.
Yeah.
And there were certain reasons that they worked for me. And when I found myself outside of that, and then I started to grow this empathy. Like, oh, this is what it's been like for the LGBTQ community. Oh, this is, and it just all these light bulbs started going on, right? And so then I look at these 4 boys who have grown up, surrounded by this sort of, really conservative perspective. And I wanted them to have the freedom to come to their own conclusions about the world and what their worldview would be. But I also wanted them to see more examples of more open-minded and progressive values than just me. And so I started this thing called Dinner with an Expert. So I sat the boys down and said, okay, who are some folks that you would love to just ask questions of and learn about? And so we just made a list of, it was like someone from another country, someone who's an atheist, someone who knows a lot about space, someone about climate change, someone with a disability, and just made this list of people that were different than them. And then we would have that person or couple over for dinner, and the boys would have hours to just throw questions their way. And I have very curious boys, and so and they're very intelligent, right? And so and just really engaged in these conversations. And we would stay late into the night talking about all the ways of the world from all these different people. And what was so cool is they were hearing it from other adults. And these are people that were experts in their field, right? They were scientists, professors, and people who'd had real lived experience in different things. And so it was, I highly recommend, a really pretty simple thing to do and has a huge impact on your kids.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Hey, how do we get invited to one of these dinners?
Yeah,
Question one, can we restart
the series?
That sounds spectacular. I think it's very important. The first thing you said was that this opened your eyes to empathy. And I think that's such an important part of this because it's come up time and time again that a lot of people switch their political perspective when they start seeing outside of their comfort zone.
Yes.
And you suddenly realize that there are other people and you live in a community. And it's part of the reason, and I've touched on this before, is I grew up in New York City, which is a very blue place. I grew up with very liberal parents. I grew up with weird parents. I can ride a unicycle because my dad was a clown. It was a weird childhood. All the way across. But when you're surrounded by other people and you're on the subway, you're with people, you tend to be more empathetic because you're not just in your car, you're not separate from these people, you're with them. And then you get about an hour or so outside of major cities, and that's when things start to go a little more red because you're no longer involved as much in the community. So I think, having that other perspective is huge and so, so important. And I love that you're raising your kids to know that early.
Yeah. And they have turned out really amazing. So I remember sitting on a rock one time with my son, and he was like, Mom, he was 12 years old. And he's like, how am I going to decide what to believe? Right. Because there's this perspective and there's your perspective, and I don't know how to choose. I said, you're actually in the optimal position because you are going to learn how to be a critical thinker. And I don't ever want to tell you this is what you should believe. Look at the beliefs out there. Look at the character of the people who hold those beliefs and look at what the outcomes are of having those beliefs and make that decision for yourself. And thankfully, all 4 of the boys are super amazing and they're becoming adults now, and I'm very proud of them. But it was a journey. And every time you come up against change, your brain alarm goes off. Threat, 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 right? Because to embrace a different perspective requires me acknowledging that the one I have is not the best.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's psychologically very painful.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up to. It's like, well, if the way of the world isn't exactly what I thought and exactly what I've been taught this whole time, well, then what happens to my ego? Like, what happens to anything?
Yes.
It really is, from my perspective, it's like just being exposed to different kinds of people and knowing that the way that you're experiencing the world isn't the only way. And I think that leads right into empathy, which is one of my favorite things about your campaign, is that you are leading with empathy and kind of showing others how to do it too, which kind of brings us to the larger question of how do we change the culture? How do we have these conversations with people who are different than us and get them to see, you know, you're not really voting in your best interest.
Yeah.
You're kind of hurting yourself with how you're electing leaders who don't respect you or your bodily autonomy or respect your rights. How do we get the conversation shifted? How do we?
Because it does feel so much right now like people are voting very much just on party lines. It's
Yeah.
no longer issue based. It's really like, I'm team red, you're team blue, and never the twain shall meet.
And take, for example, you know, Republican incumbent Zach Nunn, who is a veteran and voted against a bill to support veterans.
Yes, and that's nuts.
Right? Okay, so, but this is my favorite topic. So I went on to get my master's in mental health counseling, and I worked as a therapist for several years, and then realized, I want to do systems change work. And so, you know, now I'm running a nonprofit and just wrapping up my law degree. 1 week left of classes.
Queen. Coming at us from all sides with success and knowledge. Anyway, continue.
But the intersection of psychology and politics, I mean, those are my two areas, right? And so I'm fascinated by this. And so there is a stages of change model by researchers Prochaska and DiClemente. And in the first stage is pre-contemplation. So this is where I was before, where many folks are, where like Republican rules work for everyone, just follow the rules and everything will be fine for you. The next phase is contemplation. And that's where you start to go, okay, maybe that woman needed an abortion and didn't get one and then she died. Or maybe that gay teenager was bullied so much that he went and completed suicide. And you start to kind of question, maybe these rules are causing some harm. And then there's the preparation phase. And that's where folks are like, these are problematic. I don't necessarily know what to do about it. And then the action phase is where you both are. And that's where you're out and making changes. So where I think we get discouraged is we talk to folks in the pre-contemplation phase and expect in one conversation to get them to the action phase.
Right.
We need fast action. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you walk away from the conversation like, that didn't go well. But what if our goal is just to get someone from pre-contemplation to contemplation? Or they're in contemplation and we're just moving it to preparation, or from preparation to action. And not feel like it's our job to move people along that entire spectrum. Maybe you figure out which phase is your favorite one. Like, I love when people are in this, all about how to get them to the next one, or that's my sweet spot. So if someone's in the pre-contemplation phase, they're not going to respond to facts or research data. Like those are just like off the table. It's going to end up into, it's going to be a fruitless argument. And then you're going to tap into confirmation bias. So both people just dig their heels deeper into what they already believe. And you can actually do more harm if you come hard at someone who's in pre-contemplation. And so if someone's in pre-contemplation, the things that are effective are things like storytelling. And for me, it's easy for me because I can say, hey, I used to think this and then this happened and now I think this.
Yeah.
You can't argue with the story, right?
No.
I'm just telling you my story.
Right.
And open-ended questions. So you ask someone, so how did you come to believe that? Right? And sometimes people have in their head like talking points they've heard on Fox News or, some clickbait article online, and they have it in their head, but they've never actually articulated what they believe or why they believe it. And as they say it out loud, they start to trip over it a little bit, right? And I have zero interest in being condescending or making anyone feel ashamed for what they believe or where they're at. It's more just the process of, okay, is this really logical, what you believe? And if I just ask you some open-ended questions, it gets you to a point where you might be wrestling with it yourself. And you might walk away from the conversation and not think that you had an impact, but they might go home and process some things. And if you get someone to a contemplation phase, they might vote for a Democrat.
Yeah.
Just because they're questioning it enough. We don't have to have everybody in the action phase to vote for Democrats. And it takes the pressure off of us that we don't have such a heavy lift to change culture.
My fiance and I lived in an RV from 2015 to 2018. We left New York and we headed to California and then back again, and we drove all over the country. And so we were on the road during Trump's campaign and during his election. And it was this very interesting thing because we were two people from New York, and people were, you know, especially when we were in pockets of the South and rural areas, people were predisposed to not like us. They saw us arrive. My fiance had very long hair at the time. I look like this.
Cool as hell.
That's
it's been referred to as my liberal plumage. Like, you just know when you see me that, like, I'm not voting red. And we would have these conversations where, you know, and it was led by Kyle, by my fiance, where he would just be like, well, why did you vote for Trump? Like, what did he say that you liked? And you would see people sort of glitch and be like, well, I don't. Specifically, I can't really tell anything specific. And you'd see them sort of like change, like something would click in them, because we weren't being like, you're stupid and we're liberals and we don't like you. We were just having conversations with them and asking them questions. And it was interesting to see, like, there was a little bit of something was happening there. And I'm really glad that someone with a degree in this is like, yeah, you're right. Sweet.
No, I feel like I was personally really bad in like the 2016 era, where it's like, you didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, how dare you? And like knee jerk, everyone else was stupid and not listening. And it's like, that was the least helpful rhetoric I could have been spewing. And I'm not perfect, and I still don't really like certain politicians, clearly.
Do you have opinions on politics, Liz?
Turns out I do. But I am a lot more aware of, like, you're not going to change anyone's mind or help them see what you're trying to say by making them feel stupid. Right. And unfortunately, yeah, you wish you could just be like, don't you get it? But that's not an effective means of communication. And clearly it's deeper than that. We're still in this position 8 years later, and we have people who agree with a literal rapist who is running for president, someone who is a convicted criminal. Yeah. And it's nothing that
might
we
be in
really
a courthouse right now, actually, as we
farting in a courthouse in New York right now. But there's nothing that we can say to like make people. You can't get mad at someone into
the problem
thinking
is,
differently.
like, what alerted us to the problem was anger, right? So anger is the emotion that's designed to see, is like the warning bell, like, hey, something's not right, something's not fair, but then what happens is we sometimes take that anger in to solve the problem, and it's not very good fuel for solving problems. It works as an alarm bell, and then we got to work things out with our people. And before we go out into the world to go and make changes, okay, what are some other emotions that I could fuel myself with to actually do this work? And that's where things like empathy, inspiration, hope, compassion, right? That those have to be our fuel. One is because people are more likely to respond positively if I show up leading with those emotions, but also because then I don't get burnt out myself. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been through the phases where I used anger as a fuel, and it's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah, exhausting. Even in 2020, when everyone was like at each other's throats, like, you voted this way and you did this and you didn't get the shot, you didn't do this. I had a huge fight with one of my best friends because tensions were just so high. And I'm like, I respect you as a person. You respect me as a person. We're not helping one another by just being bullheaded assholes. Like, we need to communicate here. And we're still best friends to this day. And I think it's because she's a really empathetic person and I'm an empathetic person. We were able to find that ground and understand one another. Yeah.
And I will also say, like, there are times when you are with your action people and you have to complain about politics and you have to be snarky and you have to make the jokes. And I mean, you both do that very well. Because that's sort of like, there's a place where that's therapeutic too, right? But that's not how we necessarily show up when we're having those one-on-one conversations or speaking to a crowd of, folks that have different viewpoints. So yeah. Know your audience, right?
I think knowing your audience is definitely important. And again, if you, dear listeners, find yourself up against someone who differs from you politically, try asking questions rather than just telling them they're stupid.
Yes. And here's what will happen is when I actually changed my views, it wasn't because someone gave me a good argument on an issue. It was because when life got messy, the people who ran were the ones that couldn't handle mess. And if you're not in the developed stage of critical thinking and moral, maturity, you can't handle when life gets hard. But the people that stuck around me were people that I always thought were the bad guys, right? And now they were the ones supporting me and reaching out. And it was when I hit that hard point in life that I became open to different beliefs. So it actually had nothing to do with the issues. But once I experienced that sort of acceptance and love and compassion from folks, it was like, oh, now I'm more interested in what you have to say, because people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So
Yeah.
Wow.
I like that.
I love that. Amazing. Moving on to kind of a blatant fact that keeps me up at night. 29% of Congress is women. Just 29.
Not a lot.
But mathematically, we're like 50% of the population.
50, almost 51.
Right? 4B movement? Just kidding. Just kidding. What would a government that had equal representation look like?
Yeah. I think this is fun to like imagine. I feel like
You have to.
I feel like it even goes beyond what I'm capable of imagining.
Mm-hmm.
Because our brains don't let us go there sometimes.
It's
right?
never existed before. I mean, we honestly don't know.
I mean, there's some, like, the easy ones are like, I don't think we would even be talking about abortion rights.
Oh my
that
God,
would have
yeah.
been settled so long ago.
Yes.
LGBTQ rights.
Yeah.
Support for single parents and people in poverty. And I think some of the social issues, we would have a much better framework. I'd be curious what what you're imagining. What would be different?
First of all, mandatory dance parties. Just kidding. That's just if I was in charge. No, I think it definitely leads into where your campaign sits, like leading with empathy, having that kind of understanding of what women go through, what other populations go through. I know it's not like, maybe it is factual, but women seem to be more empathetic than our male counterparts, or more willing to listen and be more
relational.
More relational, yes. There was actually that study that came out that talked about how female doctors provide better care or better care outcomes when compared to their male counterparts. I'm like, okay, there seems to be a lot of evidence signaling that women are not only capable, but excelling in their fields. Female leaders are excelling in their fields, but if they were given the opportunity to really get in there and cook, I can only imagine a lot of the little petty, like, culture war bullshit would fade away, and we'd start focusing on things like clean water,
Right.
energy dependence, like, things that really actually impact people's lives, and not what books can we ban from this elementary school in Florida.
Well, it's also, and I mean, this is obviously anecdotal, but there's this old thing where women get upset and they want to talk through it, and they want to like get from point A to point B, and then men, not all men, but men get upset and punch a hole in the drywall, and it's just a different way of approaching situations. And I think with more women in charge, and allies, of course, I think it would be, if nothing else, a neater government.
Mm-hmm. Well, and think too, like, even women in politics who are Republican women are entering into a space that's historically been dominated by men. And so there is going to be that temptation to act more in line with how men have, what they have focused on and what they have voted on. I think it's going to take a while for women to step into this place of all women understanding how to vote in our own self-interest. But I also want to point out that I think that you can be socially responsible and fiscally responsible.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we don't give enough attention to the social issues, I think it hurts our economy and it hurts our fiscal position as well. So, for example, at the Beacon, we're working with women, coming out of prison, and we provide housing and all these wraparound programming supportive services for them for $26 a night, whereas taxpayers are paying $106 a night to incarcerate someone. So we're doing something that's socially responsible, but it also saves a lot of money for taxpayers. And so I think some people have this idea that you have to pick one or the other. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no. When you do it well, when you do it right, and women are amazing at getting a lot of things done and doing them well, like, you can also save a lot of money. So I think bringing that influence of women into politics would have a lot of positive impacts.
That's actually a great segue. Can you tell us more about your work at the Beacon?
Yes. So I got to the Beacon, it'd be almost 4 years ago.
What is the Beacon?
Yes.
Start there.
Yes. So the Beacon is a home and programming for women who are coming out of traumatic situations. Most of them are coming directly from prison, homelessness, domestic violence, substance use treatment facility. And when I got there, and I'm meeting these women, and they are amazing. They are resourceful. They're kind. They are some of the hardest working people I have ever met. I mean, when we get there at 4:30 in the morning, they're like lined up at the door, ready to go to the bus stop to get to their jobs by 6 o'clock. And then they do these jobs that are not easy jobs I would not want. And then they ride the bus back, and then they go to their, substance use recovery meeting or their counseling session, or they meet with their financial literacy coach. And so they're doing these things in the evening. They're trying to get their, get to see their kids and get their finances in order. They are working so hard. And when I hear people say things, like, oh, they just need to get a better job, or, oh, they just, and there's all this like stigma around women. I'm like, oh, come to the Beacon. Come to the Beacon. You will see these women work incredibly hard, and they have come from incredibly difficult backgrounds. So as I'm meeting these women, and I'm like, why are we incarcerating these women? They have substance use disorders, mental illness, a lifetime of poverty. A lot of them are domestic violence survivors. Substances were just their way of coping, and they don't have access to other resources or know where to find other paths forward. Like when I landed in poverty, it was like, oh, I already know how to have money. I already know how to do that and how to be successful in life, because that's the path I'd been on my whole life, right? For these women, when they hit bottom, they don't even know where that path is. So that's when I was, asking the question about like, what would it look like if we offered them support instead of punishment? And that's what led me to kind of last minute take the LSAT, and thankfully it went well. And Drake was like, here's a full ride. And
Incredible.
Just a last minute LSAT. Like, no big deal. Just let that's fine. That's fine.
Incredible.
But I don't even want to be a lawyer. I mean, honestly, like being in law school is like, for me, is like just chewing on cardboard, essentially. It's like, nom. But sometimes as a woman, you have to have credentials to get a seat at the table. And I wanted to be at the table. And so we did it. So last year we launched pretrial jail diversion. So women can stay in the community and be with their kids and have housing and supportive services and get their mental health in a good spot and their finances in a good spot. And then when their court date arrives, their attorney can say, hey, my client is sober. She's going to counseling. She's paying rent. She's got her kids. Can she have probation instead of jail time?
That's awesome.
That's incredible. I don't think people quite understand how harmful going to jail is for people. Not only are you putting someone in a cell, but you are also disrupting the trajectory of their entire life and the people that are related to them or depend on them.
Yes. And so if you have a parent who's been incarcerated, you have a 70% chance of being incarcerated yourself. So families that most of them have, 2 or more kids here, that in these situations, like, this is a compounding problem. Worldwide, there are 9 million incarcerated people, and 2 million of them are in the United States. So
don't even get me started on the prison industrial complex. That could be a whole episode. But
right?
It comes back to the main theme of the episode, which is empathy. I think a lot of people are quick to judge or say, well, why don't they pick them up by their bootstraps, or why don't they do this? But it requires thinking just a little bit harder, thinking just a little bit deeper, and understanding that your life path and all of the resources you have are not universal for everyone. For instance, if I'm struggling, which you can mentally, financially, whatever, as a person, I have an entire support system in my family and my friends. I have education to back me up. Yep. But the reason that I have these things is because XYZ happened and because I was born into these circumstances. Not enough people understand that circumstances are variable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think we're starting to talk about it more now. Like, even the conversation about Nepo babies, like, absolutely comes into this. There's so many people who are successful.
Pat Grassley
is a really good example, because their parents were successful, or just love ice cream, or grandfathers, and just live forever and ever and ever. Yeah, but it becomes this thing where, you get all these opportunities afforded to you because of the situation you were born into. And I think people focus on that rather than the other side of it and like, let's lift the other people up. And I think the work you're doing is amazing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And that's what led me to say, hey, my sweet spot is changing systems, right? And it takes a few steps, right? First, you have to figure out, okay, we're all aware of a lot of systems that are harming people, but go in and figure out what's a solution to this. How do we change this system so that we're not just helping people one by one, but we're actually changing the whole thing? And the next one is getting stakeholder buy-in. So that means when I go and talk to people, the chief justice, the chief of the jail, the folks that are engaged in this work, and I want their buy-in, I'm not going to come and tell them why I think we need jail diversion. I'm going to tell them why they think, like why they might think we need jail diversion. And so getting like how this will help your job be better is important. And then educating the community so that you get that kind of community support around what you're doing, and to do all of those steps together and then have the determination to actually go and do it. I was like, oh, I really like this.
That's your jam.
And so I'm like, oh, this is what we need in government. That's where these systems come from.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Quite literally. And I don't think a lot of people understand the interconnectedness of a lot of issues as they are. For instance, education. There are statistics that prove when a community is educated or has access to strong public education, they fare better economically. They fare better crime statistic wise. Like it's not just a one-off issue. Everything is connected, and it all goes back to, as a society, what do we care about? Do we care about helping one another out? Do we care what's happening to the least of us? Like, I think that's a better kind of like preview of how well a society is functioning. Like, instead of the stock market is doing whatever, like how is everyone doing?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it kind of seems like we're not doing that well. So,
and I think let's get a therapist in Congress too, right?
right.
I'm here for it.
Oh my gosh. Have
think
we ever
mental
had
health
one?
I don't think so. They've all been focused on being politicians.
True.
Well, and that is an interesting point. Here's a big difference between the incumbent Zach Nunn and myself. So I went to high school with Zach Nunn, and he came to high school ready to be a politician. He was wearing a suit, he carrying a briefcase, and like ready to go. And his
Ew. That's awful.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, but that's like that is the worst. I hate
Nightmare
that.
blunt rotation, high school Zach Nunn added. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I couldn't keep that ew in my body. I'm so sorry. Continue.
But so that is his lane, is to be a politician. So he will bend his values to stay in that lane.
Yep.
That's the goal as politician. For me, I'm like, I want to change the world. I want this to be a better place for us and our children and our grandchildren. If politics is the best venue to do that, that's where I'll go. If it's something else, I'll go there.
Preach.
Yeah.
My values will stay the same.
I love that. I think that is an excellent point to endorse you, and go to melissavine.com, follow Melissa Vine for Iowa on Instagram, and I'm assuming the other socials.
All of the socials.
The primary is June 4th.
That's right.
So make sure you're registered to vote, which I tell you to do every time we have a show. Go register to vote if you're not registered already.
And if you're not registered as a Democrat, you can do it that day. So
you can do it that day. That's great
show
intel.
up. You can, if you're registered to vote, you can just show up, and they will. They can make it Democrat.
Switch your party.
So you
Cool.
can vote. Yep.
And Iowans, if you're listening, I know we probably say this a lot, but please care.
Please care.
Please care.
Because Iowa, we can do better.
Iowa, we can do better, and we can do better with Melissa Vine. We can do better the more we are aware of what's going on, how we can help, how we can work together to create change. MelissaVine.com.
Melissa Vine for Iowa on all socials. Make sure you're following us, Iowa We Can Do Better, Sarah Bowes, Liz from Iowa. And thank you so much.
That kind of does it. We're just going to keep everyone more and more updated on how the election cycle unfolds. We're heading into May. We're almost to June, which is the primary. And then we've got all summer to be around all the people who want us to vote for them.
The state fair is going to be a zoo.
It sure is. I don't know if I can do it this year, guys.
It's my 40th birthday. You're coming to the state fair. Sorry.
Say less.
Yeah.
I'll be there. But I'm going to be, it's always really hot.
Yeah. My birthday's in August. I know.
You poor thing. But yes, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for visiting us, Melissa. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you for the work you do.
We're trying. I
You're amazing.
with the platforms we have, we're just trying to do as much as we can
It
to
takes
make a little
yeah.
bit of change.
Yep. Yep.
That's
I
a goal.
think there's a better Iowa past November. What about you?
Oh, I have a lot of hope. Let me give you this one last statistic. 61% of Iowans believe that abortion should be legal in most or all cases. We are in the majority.
Yes.
We are in the majority.
And people will vote
They
when
will.
that's on the ballot.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely.
I feel healthy, like optimism as
yes.
well. So
I think so.
let's end on that. Thank you
Awesome.
for coming by, and see you next time on Iowa We Can Do Better.